Please subscribe to our channel, Pacific Front Untold, and be sure to leave a comment after watching a video. The occupation of the Philippines by Japan during the Second World War not only threatened the very lives of ordinary citizens, but also severely limited their freedoms under a new colonial and military presence. Those guerrilla fighters who resisted Imperial Japan's occupation came from diverse Filipino communities that crossed class strata, language differences, gender, and sexual orientation. Yet the histories that survived and are often promoted about the Filipino resistance to Japanese and American imperialism continues to be limited in scope and representation. After World War II, these histories of the Filipino guerrilla resistance were typically viewed through a Euro-American lens and highlighted Western resistance leaders like Wendell Fertig. As a result, this created a patronizing image of Filipinos as victims caught between larger geopolitical forces rather than agents of change that fiercely mobilized to fight for their country's independence. Additionally, the Euro-American narrative of the Filipino guerrilla campaign is also predominantly male-centric. The experiences and histories of people that exist outside these masculine Western narratives are consequently regulated as footnotes, if not completely left out of history, to uphold and reconfirm culturally entrenched gender conventions. The second edition of Pinay Guerrilleras, the unsung heroics of Filipino resistance fighters during the Pacific War, written by Dr. Stacy Ann Baturina Salinas, attempts to fill in these historical gaps. Salinas specifically highlights the diversity of Filipino resistance fighters, called guerrilleras, who were vital to forging a path towards Philippine sovereignty and liberation, and were often the lifeblood of the war efforts in the Philippines. Much like their male counterparts, Pinay guerrilleras faced overwhelming odds as the threat of death and torture by the Japanese army loomed over them. But for women of color in the Pacific, they were especially vulnerable to other threats, such as rape, human trafficking, and sexual slavery. One of the most noted and memorialized Filipino resistance fighters in Philippine history was Colonel Yay Panlilio. Born in 1913, Panlilio was a mestiza who was raised by an Irish-American father and a Filipina mother in Denver, Colorado. Always proud of her biracial and multicultural background, Panlilio left the United States as a teenager to pursue a career as a radio news correspondent and journalist in the Philippines. Her professional career proved essential in the execution of her particular style of insurgency. She began as a U.S. intelligence agent when it became evident that the Japanese would commit a full-blown military occupation of the Philippines. However, she soon became restless, knowing that she could contribute more towards the resistance, and declared herself as a guerrillera. Panlilio utilized her position as a radio news correspondent at KZRH Manila Radio to facilitate propaganda against the Japanese and send coded messages that revealed information about nearby Japanese activity to the newly forming resistance movement. Panlilio evaded suspicion from the Japanese in Manila for a while, but eventually had to make a sudden escape into the jungle when they attempted to arrest her. It was in the jungle that she met Marcos V. Agustin and his unit of guerrilla resistance fighters, who later became an important part of the marking guerrillas itself. Panlilio's autobiography, The Crucible, an autobiography of Colonel Yay, Filipina-American guerrilla, is considered to be one of the best historical accounts when trying to understand the experiences of Filipina resistance fighters who were in positions of authority. However, in her written works, Panlilio notably downplays her contributions to the movement as an outspoken journalist, guerrillera spy, and Filipino patriot, instead preferring to emphasize the contributions of men, like Marcos V. Agustin, or Markings, with whom she had an abusive romantic relationship throughout the war and afterward. Similar to Yay's tone that diminished her wartime contributions, other Filipina resistance fighters interviewed for the second edition, including Lourdes Poblete and Serapina Armas, sometimes described their efforts as more of a support role to male officers of higher rank, rather than focusing on their contributions as pivotal to the overall movement. Rigid gender expectations rooted in Western colonialism and imperialism influenced the ways Filipinas either censored themselves or softened their recollection of their roles, likely out of fear of being perceived as arrogant or shameless when revealing their accomplishments. Panlilio's autobiography should undoubtedly be seen as an accomplishment in and of itself, primarily because it provides an important and rare glimpse of what the Filipina insurgency was like during the Second World War. But it also provides commentary about the delicate dance that Filipina resistance fighters had to undergo as individuals experiencing sexism on both sides of the front, both on the battlefield against the Japanese and in her Filipino resistance unit that doubted her leadership capabilities. Overall, the attempts to preserve Filipino history, especially the guerrilla resistance that was essential for its national liberation, continue to struggle under the constraints of colonial and imperial forces that have neglected narratives about wartime experiences. Fortunately, Panlilio's autobiography is an exception to the rule, with its first-hand evidence providing a wealth of information for the Filipino community about individuals who speak for themselves about their lived experiences during a time of total war. To learn more about Filipino wartime heroines, pick up a copy of the second edition of Pinay Guerrilleras, the unsung heroics of Filipino resistance fighters during the Pacific War.